Hi everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined today again with my hero, John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
Now, last time on Psychology 3, we spoke about uniqueness. Today, Psychology 4, we are talking about thought process. So if uniqueness is stage 1, thought process is stage 2. Now, John, can you explain a little bit more about thought process, please, and where you would like to go with it?
Right, so step 1 was the uniqueness, that was intangible, that was the mind. Step 2 is tangible, it's the brain. That's why I've got my brain shirt on.
Yes, my favorite.
And if you've seen the very first one of our episodes on one of our videos, this was the shirt I was wearing the very first one. So it's kind of like a throwback day here, going all the way back to video number 1. But we're talking about the brain today. That's what we're talking about. And everybody's got a unique mind, their uniqueness, that's different. Everybody's got the same brain, but the difference is the 4 thought processes. What gear is your car in? What gear is your brain in? What circuit are you following? So in the Psychology 2, I talked about the model, how I came up with this model for the mind and brain, how I discovered it. And in the graph, it instantly showed 4 thought processes. So I want to talk about these 4 thought processes. And the way that I talk about it is I use these numbers, and it comes from this card flip analogy. So there's this very famous test that was done. And there was 4 decks of cards. 2 decks had a red back, 2 decks had a blue back. People could pick any deck, flip a card, and they won or lost the money on the card. What they didn't know was the red decks had big winners and big losers, and more losers than winners. It was dangerous. The blue decks had little winners, little losers, and more winners than losers. It was safe. At the end of 10 flips, everybody's unconscious brain knew, they absolutely knew the red deck was dangerous. So remember, that's 10 flips. After 40 flips, people's behavior changed. They stopped picking the red deck as much, but they still picked it. After 80 flips, they said consciously, that red deck is dangerous. And I like to say, I've just shown you everything you need to know about your behavior and the behavior of other people. Well, that 10 and that 80 are 2 thought processes. So the 10 thought process is this super conscious thought process. And part of the story I tell is I say professional gamblers, not addicted gamblers, but professional gamblers took the same test, and in 10 flips, they said that red deck is dangerous. And I like to ask people, do you want to live your life at 80 flips or at 10 flips? And the answer is 10. I mean, you want to know things within 10 flips. You don't have to wait it out to 80, right? What's your plan to get to 10? And that's when people look at me and go, I don't know. 10 is this super conscious. There's no word for it in psychology. There's no word for this thought process in psychology, but it's this super conscious ability to see things way ahead of consciously knowing them. And I call that flow. It's a super conscious, but that's what I try to help people do. I try to help people get into that place where they can know things way ahead. So we'll call that the 10 thought process. The 80 thought process is when you are conscious. When you're conscious brain, you're aware, you're focused, you know what's going on. We talked about resiliency. My definition for resiliency is the ability to get to the 80 thought process and stay in it despite what happens. So the 80 thought process is this resiliency. Psychologists call this self-control. Basically, they call it self-regulation. So if you read a paper and someone says self-regulation, I interpret that as 80. And the reason why I use numbers is when we get to the next 2 thought processes, if you use the terms that psychologists use, or you use a yellow light or a red light, it causes people to trigger. If we use numbers, people don't seem to care. So 80 is this self-regulation. What happens is that we can form this addictive thought process. It's called regulation. I call it 160. And the reason why I call it 160 is I imagine it this way. If you get to this addictive thought process and think you're going to overcome it consciously, it's like you're at 160 flips and you need to do the thing that drains you 80 times to get back to normal. So I usually draw these on a square, and I have 80 here, 160 down here. So people who have addiction or depression issues, they spend their life efforting up to 80, and the minute they take their eye off the ball, they're back down to 160. So this is that addictive thought process where depression, all that stuff occurs. Then 320, because I just double it again, 320 is where we trigger. 320 is where we lose self-control. This is called dysregulation. So there's dysregulation, regulation, self-regulation. There's no word for this 10 thought process. I get people to flow, and if they flow, they're on top of this square, and they don't have to effort their way up from depression. So those are the 4 thought processes in general.
I love that. And I love what you were talking about there, about the 160, about this addictive personality, you know, the addiction, the addictive behaviors. And it's all to try and get to that 80 without actually having to do any work on the person's self. So this means that they can have a substance, they can have, and it goes right down, like you hear, and I don't want to go too far off topic here, but we hear people who go to the gym quite a lot to improve their mental health. Now, this has been told, it does work. We spoke about it in the last video about releasing endorphins. It stops us from self-harming. It stops us from feeling depressed at that time. However, this is the quick fix. So if someone doesn't get to go to the gym for a couple of days due to work, illness, anything, it comes this massive crash. And then to try and get themselves back up, it's going to take even double, if not more, to get back to this position of self-regulation. So when I talk to people about addiction, I don't even, you know what I'm like for labels, right? I'm against them, but again, it's how people recognize words and speech and things. So when I'm talking about depression and I'm talking about the addictive behaviors and things like that, I ask where they can look at there in life and where they can start to gain energy. Because if they're not, I look at people as, where are you gaining energy and where are you losing it? If you're not losing, you're definitely, if you're not winning and gaining, you're losing. And this is the point where it stops and allows them to think. And unconsciously, they're actually saying to themselves, well, what would make me? Most people don't know what allows them to gain energy. And this is what keeps them at this 160.
Right. So I'm going to take it through an analogy because that's a perfect setup for the Harvard Business Review. I think this was like 3 years ago. They had an article that said too much focus, that'd be 80, too much focus damages the brain. And so what they say in the article is 80, too much focus causes the focus circuits to blow out and the person loses energy, just what you said, 160, and then they lose self-control. So in the article, they show well, they don't show this thought process yet, but they talk about these 3. And they say the only healthy thought process is the flow, which is toggling between 80 and 10. So that's the thing, is the article says to toggle between 80 and 10. And a lot of that exercise, you're in a flow state when you exercise. That's why that works, is they need to exercise to get in a flow state, because if they don't do that, then they lose energy, then they lose self-control. We did all these videos on how to handle lockdown. People start losing energy, and then they're one event away from losing self-control. Now, look at this bottom part here. We have talked about personality tests.
Yeah.
What's a personality test? We talked about it's these 4 measures, the 4 temperaments of when people are unbalanced, meaning they're at 160. They've lost energy, and what happens is their attempt to try to gain energy is they're going to take control. They're going to try to have fun. They're going to do these things. And I told you the value of having that test was to prevent them from triggering or 320.
Yeah.
A personality test helps you know how to deal with a person so that they don't lose self-control.
Yeah.
And that's resolve. So there's absolve, resolve, solve, and dissolve. That's why this 4 thought process, when you really understand this model, you can instantly tell where a person's at. This is that step 2. I know the person's uniqueness. Now, which gear are they in? Because I cannot move you from 320 to 80. I got to move you to 160, then I got to move you to 80, then I can take you over here. So I need to know where you're at. The problem is 94% of people are walking around in the moment at 160.
Yeah.
94% are walking around oblivious. They look like they're at 80, and that's the problem. If you think about it, what is that? 1/6 or 94%, 1/16th. So basically, if you think about it, 15 out of 16 discussions you have with people, if you want to have a logical discussion, you're going to have it here, and you might trigger them. That's why if you're not focused, you're not going to have these good discussions. So this is where the personality test part fits in. This is how I use this. Finally, resiliency is the ability to get yourself to 80 and hold 80 regardless of what happens. So I love to ask people, what is your definition of mental health? I love to ask experts. There are people who put these advertisements on LinkedIn about they want to help you with their mental health. And I write, what's your definition of mental health? No answer. My first article in my mental health book addressed this, because if your definition of mental health is not going to 160 or 80, then no one's got mental health, because we all have moments where we drift, and we all have moments where this happens. If that's your definition, then no one is mentally healthy, and their approach will be here all the time, which I just told you the Harvard Business Review said that is going to lead to that.
Yes.
So if you think about it, that's why every mental health begins at definitions. If your definition of mental health is not having these situations and guarding against them, the act of guarding against them by focusing is going to damage it. Mental health is your ability to repair your thought process.
Yeah.
A body gets cut, a healthy body heals itself. A healthy body is not a body that never gets cut.
Yeah.
A healthy body is a body that can heal itself when it gets cut. What Colin and I are trying to do with this psychology series is help all of you be able to fix your own thought process, because that is the definition of mental health.
Yes, absolutely. And fixing, I've been speaking with a few people recently now in the UK, the way it stands. So we are going back into lockdown. It's here today. We're going into lockdown, and this is what's taking us back to level 4. They've now got a 4-tier system. And now they've got this 4-tier system, this is the most severe. So no gyms, no pubs, no clubs, no, all the things that people with the addictive, thought process, all the ones that you speak about at 160 are now lost. They're now stuck in their own heads, prisoner of their own thoughts. They have a chance and an opportunity. Every time that this is the second time that this has happened this year, they have a chance and an opportunity to come out of this themselves, with sometimes without professional help. Sometimes the professional help is enough to give them a boost, and then they work on it themselves. But I believe that we're all capable of doing it ourselves. Now, if people do not look at why they're doing and what they're making these, the gym or the substances or anything like that, if they don't understand why they're doing this, it's because they're not gaining energy, right? Again, everything goes back to energy, intangible, that feeling that we can talk about chemicals another time, but I believe that what's going to happen now is, because people are now looking, I can't get in my gym, I can't get to my pub, I can't get, what they're actually doing is they're causing themselves to go in deeper, and this is going to push them towards a 320. If they're already at 160, which is the regulation, that they're now coming down, and it's almost touching on self-destruct. There's only so long that they can touch that, and it's the straw that broke the camel's back. And this is where that you and I, as you quite rightly said, we want to help people help themselves, but we also want to help health professionals help other people in a healthy manner. Everything's about gaining this energy and momentum and growing a society or a mass of people, so that everyone has then a ripple effect. And I believe that things are going to happen that they're always repairable, always, right? But that's why I didn't say solved. So repairable for me means dissolve, same as yourself. We can always dissolve the issue and get them up to 80, then 10. Now, I know we're just about to go on to 10, and you're going to speak about that in a second, but I just want people to understand nobody's ever too far gone. It's their ability to contrastively think their life, their behaviour, proving themselves wrong. Am I doing this? Is it right or wrong? And then moving on to the next step, which is actually changing their habits to gain energy, to move themselves back up to this flow state. I know through experience, you know through experience and science. And this is where you and I have come together, and this is why we're able to help, and able to guide people onto this next level.
Right. So everything fits on this chart. And so isolation is 160, being on your cell phone is 160, but this isolation linked to depression, all that stuff, and suicide is 320. Yep. And the way to dissolve that, we said in the last video in part 3, was if you understand who you are, being who you are is 10. So people, when they get to 320, they harm someone else or they harm themselves. Some people end up dying. Some people have an epiphany. You can go from 320 to 10. Those are the people that have this epiphany. They hit rock bottom and they go, okay, and boom, they have this moment of enlightenment and they shoot up to 10. What we were trying to do in the last video is say, if you know who you are and you operate in that, that's that 10 thought process in who you are, you're never going to want to commit suicide. So yeah, the lockdown is going to cause it. The last analogy I wanted to use for this before we move on is PTSD.
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of work. I'm always shocked because I've helped a ton of people through PTSD. All these kids that I deal with in special ed, they all have PTSD, but we all have PTSD. So the first thing is the definition of PTSD that is out there tends to cause people to be ashamed of it because it implies being weak. But I have PTSD. We all have it.
Yeah.
PTSD is when you experience or witness a traumatic event that does damage to you in these 3 thought processes. This 180 is guided by your conscious brain. This 160 is guided by your unconscious. This 320 is guided by your amygdala. So what happens is there's 3 different places that you have an issue. If someone says something and you just blow up and say the F word or throw a punch, that's a 320 issue. If you just start feeling uneasy and you don't know why, that's a 160 issue. If someone says a word or you think about a word, they don't even have to say it, you think about a word and you start building and ramping up and getting more anxious, that's 80. All 3 have to be repaired differently. What's interesting is certain psychologists, they specialize in cognitive therapy, in these different, trauma therapy. And what happens is when they deal with a PTSD person, they deal with someone, they're 40% effective. Why? Because they are after one of the 3 areas. The problem with PTSD is it's 3 areas of damage. And if you don't repair all 3, it's like you did nothing at all. And I have articles about how to repair this. We do this all the time. That's not the point of this video. And maybe we can do a video down the road to talk about this. But basically, finding the issue and then fixing that. So last week, I talked about if someone acts different than a uniqueness, you could, and I use the example of a guy talking about his wife, his job and his son, and he had an issue with his son. As I talk with him about his son, I'll find out which of the 3 areas the issue's in, and then I know how to repair that, and he's fine. So that's the value of knowing these thought processes. We have issues in 3 of them. The 10, we're perfect in that area. And that's where we're getting a ton of energy. And how do we get there? That's the key.
Yeah, no, I like that. And what people don't understand is when you're talking about PTSD, everyone looks at it as if it's something that I've met a lot of people that said it can't be treated. And it can't be, I've had this for 25 years. And it's not because it's unable to be treated. It's because most of the ones treating it don't have the information to be able to do it properly and to do it on these 3 levels. And this is what I find is, depression can come from PTSD, or it could be the same thing as PTSD because the person's still stuck in the past and they've not repaired their thought process towards that thing. So anxiety, where does that come from? It comes from a forward thought of a past experience. So again, everything's coming back to PTSD. So the way that I feel is if a person understands themselves, they fix their PTSD in all 3 of these places, it's impossible for them to go back to that place unless they go through another traumatic event that allows the trigger to come in and then they live in that. Now, I don't know if that's maybe too strong a word, what I've just used there, but I believe that, again, through what we're talking about just now, anyone can be brought back up to 10. It doesn't matter how long this has been going on for.
Right. And one of my issues is we've been going through this pandemic so long that people have formed PTSD. Yeah. It's so everybody's got it. And maybe that's something we'll talk about. We definitely need to do the video when we eventually come out of this. You know, when this all goes away, it's not going away. No. Because then we got to deal with the aftermath and the PTSD. But the way I wanted to wrap this video up is I wanted to talk about the personality test and these 4 thought processes and everything, because remember, I'm talking about a step 1 and step 2. Who are you? And that's what we covered in psychology part 3. And then there's the thought process, and then there's the behavior. I use the analogy of I'm John, I drive a CRV, I skid when I leave the parking lot. And so I'm over here talking about this is who you are. And psychology is over here talking about the behavior. And I will tell you, when I had 4 different jobs, I worked at 4 different consumer products companies. When I went into each consumer products company, they all gave me the Myers-Briggs test. I took the test all 4 times, and I came out with 4 different results. So I will tell you, I am an example of a person who you take that because it's talking about behavior. And I had a different role in each company. And a lot of studies are saying that 6 months after a person takes a personality test, 50% of them no longer fit that personality. That's because it's over here at behavior. What's funny is they've added a 5th personality. They call them now the big 5. They've added being neurotic to it, which just means we can't predict what you are. So they've built in, we got 4 measures. We categorized you. We talked about that, racist and sexist mentality. We've categorized you in these 4, and now we've added a 5th. 2 years ago, a personality cluster came out, and one of the authors is from Northwestern, and they basically said that people cluster into 4 areas, and these people are adamant against personality tests. They don't even like to be called there's a personality test. They like to be called a cluster because they actively go, personality tests are garbage. Yeah. So they know that. So 2 years ago, these people came up with 4 categories. Now listen to these 4 categories. One of them is called basically no control. I want to say they self-centered. Yeah. So one of the 4 categories is self-centered. They scored very high on extroversion and very low on openness, and it was to say conscientiousness and agreeableness. So they're saying that's 320. Self-centered, they're saying there's a group of people that are self-centered. They're 320. They're basically all just wild behavior, and you can't really reach them, okay? One group was called average. And this group basically was neurotic and extroverted. And so what happens is that they're the 160. These people, and I said 94% of people are 160. They call that group average. This group is neurotic and they're extroverted. They're basically all over the place, which is where you'd be when you're in 160. The third group is called reserved. They are stable emotionally. They basically got an average score in everything. That's 80. They're not unbalanced. Personality tests measure you being unbalanced. This group reserved is at 80. The final group is called role models. And these people are high in all the categories except neurotic, meaning they're not unstable. They're stable in all these categories. That would be 10. Yeah. So what this group has done is they're really measuring your thought process. But what's interesting is, so personality tests measure behavior. They're measuring your thought process. I'd say they're one step away. Eventually, people are going to understand what I'm doing is right. But here's the issue. They're really measuring the difference between adaptation and habituation. So if we go back to psychology 2, and I talk about my model, There's adaptation, which is 21 minutes after I come in the room, I can't smell it. That's where you are in the moment. Habituation is 21 days, I can't smell this. That's where you go to be happy. What they're really measuring is, where did you habituate to be happy? These people at 80, they go to 80 to be happy, which means they can be at 160 in the moment, adaptation, but they tend to live at 80 because 80 is where they get their energy and they're happy. And this takes us all the way back to the first 3 videos we ever did, which is why I'm going old school too, is we talked about happiness. Everybody can say they're happy, but it's according to one of 4 thought processes. This Northwestern study 2 years ago is linking together where people habituate to happiness. Everybody habituates to one of the 4 thought processes. And that's what I really do when I deal with people. I want to know your uniqueness, and then I want to know where you are to be happy. So a teenage kid habituates to 160 to be happy. When you talk to them, they'll go to 80 and they'll talk to you and they'll be like, yeah, what? Anything else? Anything else? Are we done? Fine. And they want to go back to play their video games and go back to 160. You brought them up to 80. In the moment, they can talk at 80, but they're not happy until they're 160. So that's where psychology is going. I'm sitting here, I believe, with the answer. 2 years ago, I mean, I've been saying this for 25 years, but after 23 years, somebody figured out there's another step between me and these personality tests, and they're getting there. I don't know, maybe it'll take another 21 years for everybody to realize this is the real answer, but that is what's actually happening.
Yeah, and just to touch on that as well, I was doing, I was kind of corporate, doing personality testing and putting people together with that before I had met you. And then once I'd met you and we started talking for a while, I then dropped it completely. And I'm going to tell people why that was. So I'm not going to explain what test it was because we're not here for advertising, but I did it. And before I started understanding what you were talking about, I was very influential. That usually puts down to me as somebody being insecure. They have to be heard, they have to be understood. Once I started working through my uniqueness and my understanding, etc., big picture, you know, all the different kind of parts, I then put myself through another personality test and it came out unable to read. You were too balanced. It came out that they couldn't read me because I wasn't too much or too little of anything. It was a nice kind of straight line. And it wasn't because I changed the questions automatically. It was just how I felt when I was kind of reacting towards that. Now, yes, things in life can change. People can go through breakups. People can go through, you know, stressful times at work, pandemic, whatever you want to talk about. And it can change the personality at that given time. But as I say, where we are at Resiliency and being able to not change what's going on here, no matter what's going around here, this is where we can get through this. Now, I understand that if I read a personality, you know, test or whatever, I don't look at what they're telling me this person's got. What I look at is what they've not got or where they're lacking, so that then I'm able to work and talk about that to build that back up. So in terms of what it shows us, it's usually different from what some people look at. So when I was getting into these companies, and I just spoke to you there about it, obviously my personality test and how I became balanced, my main aim was to balance the people and not add people together. If you add a bunch of unbalanced people together, what I found out was it still doesn't work. And this is why that no matter how hard people try to put these unbalanced personalities together based on their behaviors when they're stressed, and they still don't have the answer. This is where, and I know that you want to finish on something here, the answer that you have is balance the people and then put them together, rather than try and force together bits of Lego that are broken.
Right. So the last point I want to make here is that, and this is what everybody goes through if you think about it, and you went through it too, is they're here at 160, they effort their way up to 80, and again, they take a personality test, and what happens is the personality test actually takes you down to 160. The personality test is telling you how to behave when you're unbalanced and what to guard against from going to here at 320. So you take that, and then you forget about the personality test and you work your way all the way up to 80 and you're focused and now you want to know what to do. You go to a coach, you go to somebody, and what do? They give you a personality test. And it takes you right back down. And so that's the issue, is a personality test is taking you from 80 to 160 versus you got yourself to 80 and then we talked and I went, get to your uniqueness. Your uniqueness is over here at 10. If you go towards your uniqueness, you're never going to go back towards this way, and then you're here flowing. So that's what I did for you, is you got yourself to 80, and then I got you over to here, versus if you look at these personality tests, all you're doing is taking yourself back down. So every time people take a personality test, I'm like, you're taking yourself back down. Go this way. So I like to say treating the symptom is preventing the cure.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And this is the main point in all mental health issues, from my belief. You know, it doesn't matter if it's PTSD, if it's depression, anxiety, any of these things is due to people trying to mask the effect or fix the effect, rather than going back to the cause, which is who a person is and how they think in the first place. So yeah, no, that's ended just perfectly, John. So listen, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to getting on to part 5 next week. And we're going to allow people to understand even deeper, more into your process and how working together we can all save the world. So thank you. Thank you again, John. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Bye.